We now call on the 2 p.m. report to the Legal Questions Committee, and I think that's Dr. McLean. Thank you.
Marjorie McLean, number 365, Minister of Southronalsay and Bury in Orkney and convener of the Legal Questions Committee. Moderator, on this first day of a General Assembly, it's worth recalling why we meet as a kind of Parliament of the Church. Every large organisation has its internal rules, its methods of ordering its work and its purpose, its mechanisms for translating the requirements of national law into its own structures. In some kinds of bodies, those would be called bylaws. In others, they might take the form of articles of association. For reasons of very long and very complicated history, in the Church of Scotland, we have our own legislation, acts and regulations, along with all the more general instructions that issue from the Assembly each year. If we didn't have those in the form that we do, we'd still have to have some equivalent of them to explain to ourselves and to others how we do what we do. I like the way we do it, though. First, we make our rules in this Assembly, which is a place of prayer and worship, as well as of law and debate. And I think that gives our decisions the unique character they ought to have. Second, we regulate ourselves in areas of life the civil law would not think to address. Our beliefs, our forms of worship, our moral standards. We are far, far more than another charity. And third, we pass and apply our laws in order to hold ourselves to a Christian standard, not just a legal one, in the expectations we make of those who lead our congregations, in the restrictions we place on our investment policy, in the way we distribute our human resources across a whole nation, and in 100 other ways. In the Legal Questions Committee, we have a remit that asks us to be ready to support the servants and agencies of the Church who work in that necessary internal legal world, and those who have to apply external civil law directly, because it applies to us too, as it would to any other large national body, and to those who have to walk the tightrope of doing both. 99% of the time, of course, it's not the committee or its members providing that support, but the staff of the Office of the General Assembly, who happen to be the ones here. In them, we have a team of legal minds who provide the most stimulating, good-humoured and enlightening conversations you can imagine. And they make us all feel secure and confident as we try to work out how to ensure we are doing the right things. As well as the many small pieces of work the committee does, you'll see several in our report, from examining the records of central bodies to providing opinions to other reporting committees where their work has a legal implication. We have 4 larger items on our plate at the moment. Firstly, our work on questions of church-state relations, including relations with the monarchy, and also including wider questions of our service of society as a whole, is stepping up with the recent creation of a small group of key individuals taking forward important conversations. Secondly, our work is underway to review the processes of dealing with complaints and disciplinary accusations, which last year we promised we would report on next year, and we expect to do so. Thirdly, we have been considering what reform of legislation is needed to facilitate the fast-developing phenomenon of team ministry, which is mushrooming as a result of presbytery planning decisions. It is clear to us that the mushrooming is still underway, and so we, along with FAPLET, have not brought legislative reform to this year's Assembly as we had thought last year that we might, because we are sure that if we had brought something now, when that wave of questions has not yet subsided, we would just then need to be bringing more next year. However, the Principal Clerk's Office has answers on the Church's website for frequently asked questions and responds to the much more interesting infrequently asked questions. And we hope to be able to bring something next year that will tidy all of that into the legislation if that's needed. And I trust that the Assembly approves of this adjustment of timing. And fourthly, we bring a draft act on presbytery review in the appendix to our report. Long ago, this work was done by synods, and in more recent years, there has been more work, and more recently still, previous pilots. Once the new version is trialled also in a pilot scheme, we will bring a more final version of it to next year's Assembly. And that provides a good example of what I said at the outset. Civil law requires charities like our presbyteries to be subject to accountability to a parent charity, not just internally and not to their peers, as previous pilots did. So in doing what the law of the land now requires us to do, we are able to use the spiritual jurisdiction of this court to go further than that and to design a process that strengthens, encourages and resources the regional church, not just to be a properly regulated small charity, but to advance Christ's kingdom through service, evangelism, prophecy, ministry. Moderator, I present the report of the Legal Questions Committee, and I move the deliverance with the exception of section 2, which was considered this morning.
Right, thank you, convener. Any questions to the convener? No. Can we move to receiving the report, section 1?
Moderator.
Oh, sorry.
There was a question. Sorry. There was a question in the queue. Alan Kimmett, 272. Thank you, convener, for the comments you made about team ministry, and we quite understand that there's a lot going on at the moment, and it will take a wee bit longer. There's a lot of team ministries being formed. I've heard a lot of people read the Presbytery Mission Plan Act when it talks about team ministries, and in specifically the way it talks about the role of the moderator, to suggest that the role of the moderator necessarily means that that minister is in some way senior or of higher status than the other ministers in the team. Is that correct?
I'm grateful for notice of the question, and it is a fascinating little insight into the way in which I think things are changing. I think there was a time, perhaps in an era, where the concept of the associate minister was more frequently used than it is now, where quite a lot of parishes, perhaps larger parishes, perhaps wealthier parishes, had a ministry where there was an inducted minister who led the team, and then possibly other ministers working alongside that. There would be no expectation, if the inducted minister were to move on, that one of those others would then become the moderator of the Kirk session. What we're finding as team ministry is growing, and I'm about to move into one myself, so I'm a bit of an expert, not just standing here, is that we now have much bigger and much flatter team ministries, where you have lots of ministers, perhaps of similar lengths of experience, or doing jobs that are much more in parallel to each other, rather than one as the boss with others being managed by them. Through absolutely nobody's fault, I think the legislation we have at the moment reflects something that was perhaps a way of doing it that used to be, but that may still be in future. And so I am hoping that we will be able to develop this in order to take into account those bigger, flatter teams without losing the possibility of the more conventional way of doing it. So the opinion that I think lies fairly obviously behind the question, I agree with, but I would want to keep both ends of it.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Does the Assembly receive the report? Yeah, we're dealing with that now. Move to... Right, we have a comment now from Alistair Burrow.
Moderator 151, Alistair Burrow. I'm Session Clerk at Bearsden, New Kilpatrick. I came to that role after 35 years in commerce and business, and I find it very strange that the Church appears not to be able to do anything without excerpt minutes, because timetables are imposed on this, and I find myself producing excerpt minutes of meetings which have still to happen and which I have to take to my Kirk session and ask them to homologate. And I'm wondering if the Legal Questions Committee could consider whether in this day and age, and echoing to some extent what Alan Hamilton said, we really need to do everything by excerpt minutes. The other thing that struck me was that the Church appears to have no protocol in how it corresponds with members of the Church. I'm constantly getting emails which I copy on religiously to the property convener, the health and safety manager, the safeguarding coordinator, and I find they've already got them, but nobody's told me that the email comes addressed to the session clerk, nobody else. And it doesn't seem to me to be beyond the wit of man to have a protocol that says this is for the following people. We do it with ministers and interim moderators and session clerks. We could extend that list so we spend less time copying things to places which already have them and making ourselves look foolish. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you wish to respond, Convener?
Just on each of those two things, on the extract minute things, if there were a more efficient way of doing it, that would be fine. But sometimes when things go wrong in the Church, there can be a bit of, we did that, no we didn't, we did that, he said that, no he didn't, he said that. And a fairly robust form of extracting properly taken minutes so that we're quite clear what is said by whom, perhaps is a bit of a safety net, so that I would be perhaps sorry to see that practice go. And on correspondence, I think as things are changing as fast as they are, no two administration teams of parishes have quite the same job titles attached. And it's all very well to say we're going to send this to every fabric convener, but not every parish necessarily calls their person a fabric convener. It might be something different. So sending things to the session clerk, who will know what their colleagues are called and make sure that they go the same way, is quite a good backup. So I don't disagree with the spirit of what Mr. Burrow's saying, but you just have to be a little careful, I think.
Thank you. Now, we've already dealt with section 2, so we're moving to section 3, and that's now subdivided. So I'll move to section 3A. And online?
Online,
Yes,
yes.
section 3 is approved. Section 3B.
Can we have some more stamp on the feet?
Yeah. The clerk's asking if we can have a little bit more enthusiasm with the stamping of the feet. And online, but watch your computer screen doesn't fall off a desk. So online, 3C. And online. And online, thank you. And 3D. And online. And online, thank you. Section 4. Section 5, for those that are still awake.
Section 5, let me check online.
All right, sorry.
Section 4 online.
Online, it's passed.
Yeah, brilliant.
Section 5. And online, section 6. I would encourage you to use the hub, but The hub's ideal, but you certainly got my attention. Well done. Have we approved section 6 online and section 7 and online? So the deliverance as a whole. Right, thank you very much. All right, the clerk would like to have a circulation break for 20 minutes. So we suspend business until 3:30 p.m.